Hi, my name is Tichina Pratt, she, they. I teach at Man UCLA Community School, and in the fall, I'll be teaching math and computer science to middle and high school students. So first I want to start off by thinking about a question, and the question is, what is the purpose of mathematics curriculum? So when I first started teaching at Man, I learned that I was working with a unique population of students who were learning math at the same time they were learning English, students who were foster youth, who were homeless youth, and students who didn't have a consistent math experience in previous years. So that may have looked like a lot of substitutes, long-term substitutes, and teachers who started the year but maybe didn't finish the year with the students. So in addition to students adjusting to a new math environment, and as I collaborated with other teachers, I realized two important things about the curriculum that I taught. And one of those is it wasn't immediately relevant to my students. And the second one is assumed that all math knowledge was created by Europeans and that it was fact. And one of the things that affects my students with that assumption is that it doesn't allow my students to really challenge or create mathematics and really to see themselves as mathematicians. And secondly, students couldn't see themselves in the math curriculum because they weren't in the math curriculum, and it was by design. So it posed my students as not creators, but as retainers of mathematics. So as I continue to think about the purpose of mathematics curriculum, my goal has become to develop math curriculum that has an immediate relevance to students and allows them to be agents of change. And what I mean by immediately relevant is that the curriculum poses a current issue that is meaningful and has an impact in their lives at this moment. So two ways that I have and want to challenge myself to do this practice is first by creating a call of action for students in a particular unit or in specific activities with the goal as to challenge students' own perceptions and ideologies and cause them to challenge something or someone else's. Second, challenge the narrative that people of color are not creators of mathematics. So some examples and non-examples of a call to action. One non-example is the graphing project that I do with my algebra students, which is a common project. Basically, students start by finding an image in which they would like to recreate, and they recreate it on the Desmos application by utilizing their knowledge of specific functions, graphs, and also domain and range and inequalities as we go over throughout the year. The second activity would be the math game project, which I do with my 7th graders, and you may be familiar with this project as well. So basically we start off with just an idea, and students come up with whatever type of game they would like to create. Some of my students get really creative. They create games that are maybe about fantasy or dragons or dungeons, and other students maybe want to create a game that has to do with music. Some students have created games that are similar to other games like Monopoly or Fortnite, or the same ideas. So students kind of think outside of the box, and then we go along and we go through specific stages that allow students to kind of start by creating their board or creating their cards or their dice and different components that go with the game. And students utilize that game so they can play the game with their friends or families. So I wouldn't consider these games as having a call to action because it doesn't necessarily challenge an idea or ideology. However, they do allow for a lot of creativity and autonomy. So I wouldn't say that I won't do these particular projects. However, I will consider doing other projects, activities, or units that include a call to action so that my students understand that math doesn't just exist in the classroom, but they can also see the math outside of the classroom, and they can see it kind of readily in their own lives and in their own communities. So my first example of a call to action was developed by an educator in West Virginia, and it's called Is There Safety in Slopes? It focuses on the Pythagorean theorem as it relates to ramps. I started this project when I was a student teaching, and as it became apparent that access to our classroom was challenging for some students. We were on the second floor, and the only way to get to the second floor at that time was by using the steps. So there were some students who weren't able to access the class for a period of time. And so we started this project, and it began by basically students just getting onto Google Maps, and I asked students to try to access the campus, from outside of the campus without using the steps. And for the particular school I was at, that was actually a challenge. There weren't a lot of accessible points in which you can enter the campus without using the steps. So we started from there, and from there you can open up a conversation and ask students, why is this important? Is their school accessible? Why do we need to have this conversation? And also you can, once it's available to us, students can get out of the classroom and kind of do that as a little field trip around the school. So after that point, we looked at ramps that were already on campus, and students began to identify them and see, do these ramps meet ADA requirements? And they can do that by utilizing the Pythagorean theorem. And the call to action for this project, which I developed for this coming school year, was that students can really look in their communities and find a store or a business in which maybe they're familiar with or have seen or gone to, and see if they have entry points that are accessible, that you can get into without having to use the stairs. So students would create a model for a ramp, and also try to convince this particular business or organization to create this ramp and go through the process of seeing how much it would cost, and they would create a whole, basically a plan for this particular organization, and that would be their project. So the second example of a call to action are a series of activities I call Math at Home, which I started the beginning of this past year with my students. And basically students we would start by doing an activity in class, which would be a particular math game. And students would take this math game home and they would play with a family member. So I would encourage students to take pictures, bring them back in, and we would put them on the Math at Home wall. And also sometimes students would make artifacts, and they would bring them in and they would put them on the wall. So I wanted to develop this particular activity by incorporating games historically from Africa and South America into the series of activities. This would include games like Dara, which is a Nigerian game, Achi, which is a Ghanaian board game, and incorporating the Inca Kipu, just to give students this call of action that's engaging families and building positive mathematics practices and experiences at home, while acknowledging that people of color are creators of mathematical knowledge. In addition to a call to action, my goal is to show students that people of color are and can be creators of mathematical knowledge. One practice that I wanted to focus on in the beginning of this past school year was to get students to challenge each other. And after watching Chris Luzniak's CMC presentation, I used his practice of building a claim and a warrant from a mathematical argument. One way that I plan to incorporate voices of color into this practice is by having students debate concepts and arguments presented in ethnomathematics. For instance, concepts and arguments around the Yoruba number system, Ishango bones, and Mayan numerals. These systems and artifacts position mathematics in historical context and allows students to challenge ideas and systems created by mathematicians of color. In closing, curriculum building is a challenge, and we keep at it for the sake of bringing our students accessible and meaningful content. I encourage you to collaborate with your coworkers, attend trainings, conferences. Feel free to reach out to me, as I'm also curriculum building, and we can collaborate in this effort together.